The desert teaches a harsh truth, that the life you are cast out from is not the life you have lost, but the one you were finally freed to truly find. The dust of redemption gap clung to Abigail Hayes's worn calico dress, a final, gritty farewell from a town that had turned its back on her. Her father, a man whose faith had been as unyielding as the surrounding mesas, was gone, and with him, the thin veil of protection that had shielded her from the town's narrow judgments. His passing had left a silence that the whispers of the congregation quickly filled. An unmarried woman, alone, her spirit too vibrant for their rigid expectations, was a problem they chose to solve, not with compassion, but with exile. The elders, their faces grim masks of piety, had suggested she find her own way, a gentle term for casting her out into the unforgiving wilderness that began where the town's dusty street ended. Her worldly possessions amounted to little more than a canvas satchel containing a loaf of bread, her father's well-worn Bible, a small knife, and a canteen of precious water. Each step away from Redemption Gap felt like a step into a different world, one governed not by scripture and suspicion, but by the raw, indifferent power of the sun and stone. The heat was a physical presence, pressing down on her shoulders, stealing the moisture from her breath. She walked toward the labyrinthine canyons, their towering red walls looking like silent, ancient sentinels. A strange sense of liberation mixed with her fear. The silence of the desert was more honest than the hushed condemnations of the people she had left behind forever. By the second day, the initial sense of freedom had evaporated under the relentless sun. Her lips were cracked, her throat a desert in itself. The landscape, once majestic, now felt like a prison of stone and heat. She rationed her water with disciplined sips, the memory of her father's lessons on survival in this harsh land, a faint but steady guide in her mind. He had taught her to read the signs of the earth, to find strength in moments of despair. She leaned against a sun-warmed boulder, closing her eyes for a moment, exhaustion weighing on her like a physical shroud. The world seemed to shimmer and warp in the oppressive heat, and her own resilience felt as fragile as a dry leaf. It was in that moment of near surrender that she heard it. A low sound, almost carried away by the faint breeze that whispered through the canyon. It was a sound of profound pain, choked and raw, distinctly human. Her body went rigid. Every instinct, honed by tales of peril in the territories, screamed at her to remain hidden, to flee. It could be a trap, a danger she could not afford to face. Yet her father's voice echoed in her memory, a gentle counterpoint to her fear. Compassion is the only true wilderness survival tool, Abigail. The sound came again, weaker this time. She took a steadying breath, her decision made. She pushed herself away from the rock and moved cautiously toward the sound. She moved with a quietness learned from years of walking through the quiet halls of her father's church, her worn boots making little sound on the sandy ground. The canyon twisted, and as she rounded a sharp bend, she saw him. A man was slumped at the base of a towering sandstone formation, his body contorted in a way that spoke of immense suffering. He wore buckskin leggings, and his long, dark hair was matted with dust and sweat. A dark stain spread across his thigh, stark against the light-colored material. He was a native, his features sharp and proud even in his weakened state. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and uncertainty in the profound silence of the canyon. Paiute. The words surfaced in her mind, dredged up from the fearful stories told back in Redemption Gap. The warnings of the townspeople, their faces pinched with prejudice, flooded her thoughts. They spoke of such men as unreasoning, dangerous, but as she watched, he shifted, a soft groan escaping his lips, and all she saw was a person in desperate need. The fever was plain to see in the unnatural sheen of his skin and the glassy look in his dark eyes. Her father had always preached that every soul was equal in the eyes of the Creator, a lesson that now felt more real and urgent than ever before. She could not turn away. She would not let fear dictate her heart. Slowly, she stepped out from behind the rock that had concealed her, her hands held open and away from her body to show she was unarmed. "I do not mean any harm," she said, her voice barely a whisper but clear in the still air. The man's head snapped up, his eyes focusing on her with a spark of fierce, wild energy. He tried to push himself up, to reach for a knife at his belt, but a wave of agony washed over him, and he collapsed back against the rock with a sharp intake of breath. The pride in his gaze was warring with the pain that held him captive. Seeing his struggle, her own fear subsided, replaced by a surge of resolute empathy. She knelt in the red dust beside him, her dress settling around her. "You are hurt badly," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the injury. "You have a fever." She reached out a hesitant hand, gently touching his forehead. The heat that radiated from his skin was alarming, confirming her fears. He did not flinch from her touch, but watched her with an intense, unreadable expression. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. He was a stranger, from a world entirely different from her own, yet his suffering was a language she understood perfectly. "I will help you," she said, the words a solemn vow made to him, and to the memory of her father. Abigail immediately set to her task, her movements becoming focused and efficient. She took her canteen and poured a small, careful amount of water onto a strip of cloth she tore from her petticoat. Gently, she began to clean the area around the wound on his thigh. It was a deep, jagged injury, inflamed and angry. He watched her every move, his jaw tight, his breathing shallow, but he made no sound of protest. The air was thick with a tension that was more than just the oppressive heat. It was the tension of a fragile trust being built in the most unlikely of circumstances, a silent negotiation between two souls cast adrift in the wilderness. Upon closer inspection, she saw the cause of the injury. It was not an arrowhead, but a wicked piece of rusted metal, perhaps a broken piece of a prospector's tool, lodged deep in his leg. Removing it would be necessary and excruciating. "This must come out," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "It will hurt." He gave a slow, deliberate nod, his eyes never leaving hers. His silent consent was a profound act of faith in her, a stranger who could just as easily have been an enemy. Taking a deep breath, she used the tip of her small knife and a steady hand to carefully work the metal shard free. He stiffened, a muscle in his jaw twitching, but remained stoically silent. Once the metal was out, she cleaned the wound again as best she could. She remembered her father identifying a specific type of desert succulent, its thick leaves holding a cooling, soothing gel. She scanned the nearby rocks and, to her immense relief, found a small cluster of the very plant growing in a shaded crevice. She quickly mashed the leaves between two stones, creating a green, fragrant poultice. With gentle fingers, she applied the paste to the inflamed area. It was a simple remedy, born of desert knowledge, a small act of healing in a vast and wounded land. She then bound the leg tightly with more strips from her petticoat. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, a chill crept into the canyon. Abigail gathered dry brush and managed to build a small, smoky fire. The warmth was a small comfort against the encroaching darkness and the vast emptiness of the desert night. She sat vigil, occasionally adding more fuel to the flames, watching the man's chest rise and fall in a fevered, unsteady rhythm. Just as the first rays of dawn touched the canyon rim, he stirred. His eyes opened, clearer now than before. He looked at her, his voice a dry rasp. "Hanavi," he said. "My name is Hanavi." She offered him a small, tired smile. "I am Abigail." For the next 7 days, the small rock overhang became their world. Abigail nursed Hanavi with unwavering dedication. She found a hidden seep of water, replenishing their supply. She foraged for edible roots and berries. Meager sustenance, but enough to keep their strength up. Hanavi, though weak, showed her how to construct simple snares from yucca fiber, and soon they were able to catch a rabbit, a feast that felt like a banquet. The fever in him began to recede slowly, like a reluctant tide, each day leaving him a little more lucid, a little stronger. A quiet routine settled over them, a rhythm of survival that left little room for the prejudices of the outside world. Hanavi spoke little, his words chosen with a careful economy that made each one significant. But a language grew between them in the silences. Abigail learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the quiet dignity in his posture, the way his eyes would follow the flight of an eagle high above, She saw a deep reverence in him, a connection to the land that was as much a part of him as his own breath. She felt him watching her as well, his gaze steady and assessing, not with suspicion, but with a quiet, thoughtful curiosity. In the crucible of their shared hardship, a bond of mutual respect was being forged, stronger than any words. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the flames dancing in the darkness, he finally asked the question that had hung in the air between them. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "Why did you help me?" Abigail looked into the fire, the light flickering across her face. She considered all the complex reasons: her father's teachings, her own loneliness, the injustice of her exile. But she gave him the simplest, most honest answer. "You were hurt," she said, looking at him. "Your life is not less than my own." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if her words had settled something deep within him. Later that night, he shared a piece of his own story. He spoke of 3 prospectors, their faces filled with greed, who had found him tracking a deer. They had not seen a man, only an obstacle, a savage to be removed from their path to the yellow rock they craved. They had left him for dead, taking his horse and his hunting bow. As he spoke, Abigail felt a kinship with him that transcended their different worlds. Both of them were outcasts, driven into the wilderness by the greed and fear of others. The knowledge settled between them, a shared vulnerability that deepened their connection far beyond that of a patient and his nurse. By the 8th day, Hanovi was able to stand, leaning heavily on a sturdy branch Abigail had found for him. It was time to move. Their meager supplies were gone, and the overhang, once a sanctuary, now felt too exposed. "There is a place," Hanovi said, his voice stronger now. "My people, to the west, through the canyons." Abigail did not hesitate. Her life in Redemption Gap was a ghost, a memory that held no power over her here. Her future was as unknown as the winding canyons before them, but for the first time she did not feel entirely alone in it. Their journey began at dawn, a slow, deliberate procession of 2 figures against a vast landscape of red rock and endless sky. The days that followed were a testament to their growing partnership. Abigail, with her keen eyes, would spot sources of water or edible plants. Hanovi, despite his injury, navigated the treacherous terrain with an innate knowledge of the land, always choosing the safest, surest path. Their conversations flowed more easily now, filling the quiet hours of their trek. He told her stories of his people, of the spirits that lived in the rocks and the wind. She, in turn, shared tales from her father's Bible, stories of faith and perseverance that found a new meaning for her here in the heart of the wilderness. One night, the desert sky was a breathtaking canopy of brilliant stars, so clear and close they seemed within reach. Hanovi pointed to a specific cluster of lights, a shimmering trail across the darkness. "That is the spirit path," he said, his voice soft with reverence. "When our time on this land is over, our ancestors walk that path to the next world." Abigail listened, captivated. The story was not so different from the heaven her father had preached about, a different map to the same eternal destination. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a feeling that her own path, however uncertain, was exactly where it was meant to be. She realized that her father's death and her subsequent exile, events that had felt like the end of her world, had instead been a beginning. They had stripped her of everything she thought she was, leaving only the essential core of her spirit. And here, in the company of a man she should have feared, she was discovering a strength she never knew she possessed. It was a purpose born not of duty or expectation, but from a simple, powerful human connection. She looked at Hanovi, his profile outlined by the starlight, and knew with a certainty that shook her to her soul that finding him had also meant finding herself. They had been traveling for 3 days when Abigail spotted it, a thin, unnatural plume of smoke rising against the brilliant blue sky in the distance. Hanovi saw it at the same moment, and his body instantly tensed. It was not the smoke of a village campfire. It was the careless fire of travelers, of men who did not respect the land. Without a word, he guided her behind a tall formation of weathered boulders. They crouched in the shadows, the silence between them charged with a shared sense of caution. The desert had taught them that survival was a quiet, watchful thing. They waited, their eyes fixed on the direction of the smoke. Soon, the sound of hoofbeats reached them, muffled by the sand but growing steadily closer. 3 riders emerged from a narrow pass, their figures stark silhouettes against the sun. They were rough-looking men, with rifles resting across their saddles and greedy, restless eyes that scanned the landscape. Honovi's hand went instinctively to the knife at his belt. He did not need to speak. Abigail knew. It was them, the prospectors. The set of his jaw, the cold fire in his eyes, was a testament to a memory that was still a fresh, open wound. Her own stomach tightened into a knot of cold dread. They remained hidden, their breathing shallow, until the riders had passed and disappeared into the maze of canyons to the east. Honovi led them in the opposite direction, his movements swift and silent despite his limp. They looped around, adding miles to their journey, but it was a necessary detour. They walked in silence for a long time, the unspoken threat shadowing their steps. Later that afternoon, they found a small hidden spring, a sliver of paradise in the harsh landscape. As Honovi drank from the cool water, he winced, a sharp, involuntary movement. The long day of walking had taken its toll on his leg. "Let me see," Abigail said softly. She gently unwrapped the bandages. The wound was healing, but the skin around it was red and strained. She bathed it with fresh, cool water from the spring and applied a new poultice from the plants she had gathered along the way. As she worked, her fingers brushing against his skin, a current of awareness passed between them, warm and unsettling. When she finished, he met her eyes, his gaze filled with a gratitude that went far beyond his words. He reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small object. It was a piece of sun-bleached wood, carved into the shape of a soaring hawk. "For you," he said simply, "for your spirit." Their caution had not been enough. The next morning, as they prepared to leave the sanctuary of the spring, the prospectors appeared at the mouth of the small box canyon, blocking their only exit. The leader, a man with a cruel twist to his lips and cold, dead eyes named Corbin, grinned maliciously. "Well, look what we have here," he drawled, his gaze sweeping over them with contempt. "The savage seems to have found himself a little pet." The other 2 men chuckled, their laughter a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Honovi moved, placing himself protectively in front of Abigail, his hand resting on his knife. "We got no quarrel with you, miss," Corbin said, his eyes lingering on Abigail in a way that made her skin crawl. "Just hand over the heathen, and you can be on your way. We have a score to settle with him." Abigail's heart pounded, but her voice was surprisingly steady when she spoke. "He has done nothing to you." Corbin's grin widened. "He was trespassing on our claim. That is reason enough. Now step aside." He raised his rifle, its dark muzzle pointing directly at Honovi's chest. The air grew thick and heavy, the moment stretched taut like a wire about to snap. In that instant, Abigail made a choice. She did not scream or plead. Instead, with a strength she did not know she possessed, she stepped out from behind Honovi and placed herself directly in the path of the rifle. "No," she said, her voice ringing with unwavering conviction. "If you want to shoot him, you will have to shoot me first." The men stared at her, their smug expressions faltering, replaced by a stunned disbelief. Corbin's eyes narrowed, his mind unable to comprehend her defiance. To him, she was protecting something less than human. Her actions were an affront to his entire worldview. A long, tense silence descended upon the canyon. The 2 other prospectors shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between their leader and the resolute woman standing before them. They had come for gold and easy vengeance, not this complicated, unexpected confrontation. Corbin scowled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "She is not worth the bullet," he finally snarled, lowering his rifle in disgust. "Let the desert have them both." He wrenched his horse around and, with a final look of hatred, rode away, his men following close behind. Abigail's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees, trembling, as Honovi knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. They traveled for 2 more days, pushing westward, the memory of the confrontation lending a new urgency to their steps. Hunavi's leg had strengthened, and his reliance on the crutch lessened with each passing mile. The bond between them had deepened, forged now not only in compassion and survival, but in shared defiance. They were no longer just a healer and her patient. They were partners, protectors of one another in a world that had rejected them both. One afternoon they emerged from a narrow pass into a wider valley, and Hunavi stopped, his gaze fixed on a tall, solitary pillar of rock that rose from the valley floor like a giant stone finger pointing to the sky. "The Sunstone," Hunavi said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "It is a sacred marker. My people, our home is near." A wave of relief and hope washed over Abigail, so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. They were close. The end of their perilous journey was in sight. As they stood there, looking at the stone sentinel, Hunavi turned to her, his expression serious. "There is something you must know, Abigail," he began, his dark eyes searching hers. "My father, he is the leader of our band. He is a great chief." The words hung in the air between them, imbued with a weight that Abigail was only just beginning to comprehend. She stared at him, seeing him in a new light. She had known he was strong, proud, and wise, but she had seen him only as a man, a survivor like herself. Now, she understood the quiet authority she had sensed in him, the natural leadership that was his birthright. He was not just a man, he was a future for his people, a symbol of their resilience. The realization was both daunting and humbling. The man whose life she had saved held the fate of many in his hands. It deepened her respect for him, and also sparked a flicker of uncertainty about her own place in his world. "When he joins the ancestors," Hunavi continued, his voice low, "the people will look to me to lead them." He looked down at the hidden valley that lay beyond the Sunstone. Smoke from home fires curled lazily into the afternoon sky, a welcoming sight. Then he looked back at her, and his gaze was filled with a raw, vulnerable hope that touched her to the core. "Our journey together, it was not by chance. The spirits guided you to me. My home can be your home, Abigail, if you will have it." He was offering her more than just shelter. He was offering her a life, a future, a place to belong. And looking into his eyes, she knew her answer without having to speak it. Their arrival in the Paiute encampment was met not with suspicion, but with a quiet, dignified curiosity. The village was nestled in a green, well-watered valley, a hidden oasis of life. As Hunavi, leaning lightly on Abigail's arm, walked into the central clearing, a hush fell over the people. An older man with a wise, weathered face and long, graying hair stepped forward. His eyes, when they met Hunavi's, were filled with a mixture of profound relief and stern pride. This was his father, Chief Awan. Hunavi spoke to him in their native tongue, his voice calm and steady, and as he spoke, he gestured to Abigail. All eyes turned to her. Abigail stood tall, her heart pounding, but she did not let her fear show. She met their gazes with a quiet respect. Chief Awan approached her, his eyes studying her with an unnerving intensity. He saw not the color of her skin, but the strength in her spirit, the weariness of her journey, and the undeniable bond she shared with his son. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, then on hers, a gesture of acceptance that was more powerful than any words. In that moment, Abigail understood that she was being welcomed, not as an outsider, but as the woman who had brought their future back from the brink of death. The days that followed were a gentle immersion into a new way of life. The women of the village took her under their wing, teaching her how to grind corn, how to find medicinal herbs, and how to sew with sinew and bone. There were no whispers behind her back, no judgmental stares. Her worth was measured not by her past or her lineage, but by her actions and the kindness in her heart. She found a sense of community here that she had never known in the rigid, pious world of Redemption Gap. She felt her own spirit, so long constrained, begin to expand and breathe in the open, honest atmosphere of the village. Her feelings for Hunavi, which had taken root in the harshness of the desert, blossomed in the warmth of his home. It was a love that was quiet and deep, built on a foundation of shared trials and profound respect. One evening, as they sat together watching the moon rise over the valley, he took her hand. "The elders have given their blessing," he said softly. "They see the strength you have brought back to my spirit." He then asked her to be his wife, to join her life with his, to build a future together. A simple ceremony was held, not of vows and rings, but of a shared blanket and a promise spoken from the heart to walk the path of life side by side forever. Years passed, like the turning of the seasons in the valley. Abigail and Honovi's life together was a tapestry woven with threads of peace and quiet joy. They had a daughter, a beautiful child with Abigail's bright eyes and Honovi's serene spirit, whom they named Annaba. The valley was their sanctuary, a world away from the encroaching strife of the territories. But peace in that time was a fragile thing. A rider, a sympathetic deputy from a nearby fort named Miller, brought them a grave warning. The government was planning to claim the land, to open it up for settlement. The treaty that had protected this valley was to be broken. The news sent a ripple of quiet dread through the village, but there was no panic. They had faced hardship before. It was the way of their people. When the cavalry soldiers finally arrived, their blue uniforms a stark intrusion on the natural harmony of the valley, they were met not with aggression, but with a wall of silent, unified strength. The captain, a man with a hard, unyielding face, read a proclamation ordering them to vacate the land. No one moved, no one spoke. The entire village stood as one, their presence a powerful testament to their right to be there. Then, Abigail stepped forward, with little Annaba holding her hand. Beside her stood Honovi, his presence calm and authoritative. Abigail spoke, her voice clear and strong, not with defiance, but with an unshakable sense of justice that she had inherited from her father. She spoke of promises made and broken, of the sanctity of a home, of the shared humanity that the soldiers seemed to have forgotten. Her words, spoken with such quiet dignity, had a visible effect on the younger soldiers, who shifted uncomfortably. The captain, though his face remained a stony mask, could not ignore the power of their peaceful resistance. The standoff ended not in violence, but in a grudging compromise. The army would withdraw for now, granting the village a temporary reprieve. It was not a permanent victory, but it was a victory of the spirit. They had stood their ground and held on to their home. That evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the valley, Honovi stood with his arm around Abigail, watching Annaba play. Their story became a quiet legend, a whisper among the canyons of a chief's son and a preacher's daughter who, in a time of division and hatred, had found each other. They built a life based not on what the world said they should be, but on the truth they found in their own hearts. Their legacy was one of love, endurance, and a quiet hope that proved as resilient and enduring as the ancient stones of the canyon themselves, a testament to the bridges that can be built even in the most broken of lands.